for joining our webinar today. We're very excited to have you join. There we go. So I'm John Christ, the VP of Strategic Marketing here at Hortonworks, and my co-presenter today is John Haddad. John, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, John. Yes, so I run product marketing for our big data and Hadoop solutions. Just a little bit about Informatica, at least as relates to Hadoop. Informatica really, it provides a complete set of products and services to automate the entire data pipeline across Hadoop. That is everything from data access to data ingestion, the profiling, parsing, integration, cleansing, and so on, all running natively on Hadoop to increase productivity and performance.
Thanks, John, and we'll be hearing from John a little bit more in just a few minutes. So let me start off today with a poll. If I can ask Kim to go ahead and push that poll live. What we'd like to do is just to get a little bit of understanding where you are in your Hadoop journey. So that's what this poll is designed to help myself and John have a little bit of perspective. So what I'd like to do is ask you to choose the answer that most represents where you are in your Hadoop journey. So first, you're just researching your options. You've heard of Hadoop, and you're trying to figure out which way you want to go. Do you want to go with something from Apache or something from Hortonworks, or you're looking at other maybe NoSQL options? You're currently evaluating some software, so you've downloaded Hortonworks Data Platform or some other distribution, and you're currently looking at that software and really at the beginning stages. Or perhaps you're deep in trial, meaning you've been running a proof of concept of some kind, you're loading data, you're doing some processing workloads at various levels. Or finally, your last option, what is Hadoop? And you're really at the beginning of this journey. You've heard about it. Somebody asked you to join the webinar, said, hey, here, go listen in, or whatever the case may be. You're really at the very beginning stages, and you've just heard about this funny thing called Hadoop. So take your time. We'll give you another, say, 15 seconds. But we want to understand where you are with your Hadoop journey. We will share the poll results back with you. So again, one, researching your options, just sort of getting going in your analysis of Hadoop for solving big data problems. You're currently evaluating some software. You're early on in the POC or proof of concept. Perhaps you're a little bit further down the journey. You're deep in a trial with a particular software, but still want to learn more about the options or how it's being applied. And finally, you're just learning about Hadoop. So Kim, why don't we go ahead and close the poll and look. So it looks like a good percentage of you are just at the beginning of the journey, really researching your options. A few are currently evaluating software at some level of trial. So I guess it gives us good information in terms of where we need to kind of focus our information for the webinar. So thanks everybody for taking the time to answer. Well, let me get going. Let's talk a little bit first about the trends in the big data market, and these go across a range of industries. And we've got some data here from a couple of different industry analyst firms. First, IDC, who have quite a bit of numbers and data on the growth of big data for organizations and really just for the market in general. And there's some pretty astounding numbers. 50 times growth of data between 2010 and 2020. So we're somewhere about a third of the way along that journey, and many of you might be experiencing some of that growth. It'll ultimately end up somewhere around 40 zettabytes, so a large number of zeros in terms of the overall digital universe, the amount of data that will be created. And interestingly enough, about 85% of that data will come from new types of data, meaning not the traditional data that your organization might have been collecting for the last 10 or 15 years that's often very transactional, very structured, but more from unstructured data types, things that come from machine-generated data or from web log data or from other kinds of sensors. And in fact, the growth in machine-generated data, that data coming from sensors, is set to grow at about 15x. So if your organization, and I'm guessing it is, in any part of the healthcare industry or pharmaceutical industry is using sensors to collect data from patients or from trials or from wherever you are in that process, you'll be undergoing a tremendous amount of growth of that data, and really the traditional systems really weren't set up to collect data at that scale. That's really where Apache Hadoop comes in as a solution for processing that data. Now, why collect the data? Why take advantage of it? If we turn to Gartner's numbers and look at what Gartner has figured out in terms of their research, they realize that most organizations who figure out the way to use data and utilize this big data for analyzing their data and analyzing their business generate a significant competitive advantage for those organizations. And in fact, their research says that Hadoop is really, and Hadoop-enabled relational database systems or database systems that are enhanced by or complemented by Hadoop give organizations a tremendous advantage. In fact, 20% performance advantage and competitive advantage as per Gartner for their research. So substantial reasons to find a way to take advantage of this data and to use it to analyze your business, to analyze the data, to do a better job of processing this information, because in fact you'll get a substantial advantage. So very big reasons to take advantage of this big data, and it's a trend that is not going to stop for any time in the foreseeable future. So when we talk about data, let's just talk about some of those new kinds of data that organizations are able to capture with Hadoop. And again, this is data that was not traditionally being exploited. So not necessarily new, but it's newly exploitable using technologies like Hadoop. So first of all, sentiment data. How do patients or how do users feel about a service or a product that's being offered? Clickstream data. How are you interacting with customers or prospects or others that typically interact with you via the website? Sensor data. Talk quite a bit about that. Sensors are on everything from patient self-monitoring systems to manufacturing systems, and we'll hear about a couple of examples where that's specifically applicable here in just a moment. Geographic data. Where does somebody and where is that data created? Where is somebody searching for a product or service, or where are they consuming a product or service? Server logs coming off of manufacturing systems, for example, and then finally unstructured data, which is really a catch-all for video, blogs, text, documents, any other kind of less structured information, but all still very relevant to things like patient trials and other relevant forms of collecting that kind of data. So really, these are the new kinds of data that can be exploited. And what we see in terms of the adoption is the typical usage for Hadoop starts off with a new analytic application. So I've got some new kind of data, and I want to add that and create a new analytic application to help my business, whether I'm analyzing production systems, again, as you'll hear in just a moment, or some other form of analysis. I really typically start with collecting one or two of those new kinds of data and building an application off of that that's driven by a line of business, meaning I'm trying to help out my manufacturing or my research department or one of my departments, one of my lines of business. I'm building an application specifically for them. And they typically start fairly small in scale and small in scope, meaning the best and most successful deployments don't try to, quote unquote, boil the ocean. They actually will start with a single application and keep it small. That's really the recipe for success with this technology, particularly for those who are really just starting off with with their research in this area. But where does it go? It grows out in a couple of different dimensions. It grows either in scale, meaning you're collecting more data of that same data type, whether it's machine-generated data or other, or it grows out in scope along our x-axis. So it are additional applications that are found for that data, or I add in new types of data which allow me to build new kinds of analytic applications. Ultimately, that gets to an architectural framework that we're calling and that we've heard in the industry around a data lake. And it's really an architectural shift for the data where it's collected in a single large centralized pool, and multiple applications are built on top of that. And it has to interact with the existing systems that are there within all organizations. It's not meant to replace anything, but really to complement those things for new workloads and to capture this new kinds of data. But ultimately, that ends up being something like a data lake, and those are as these deployments mature, as the usage of this technology matures, and we're seeing that quite consistently now in the market around how Hadoop's being used. So a data lake is really kind of the longer-term vision for where Hadoop ultimately can enable organizations to take advantage of this data across multiple lines of business. So if you look at it, and what we see is this form of deployment for Hadoop is applicable across really almost every industry. So from financial services to retail, telecommunications, and of course in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. So there are examples of multiple line of business specific use cases across each of these industries. And in all cases, it starts with a single line of business and a single application for the successful deployments. So that is a common deployment framework across industries. And if we look at a couple of more detailed examples across Hadoop in healthcare and pharmaceutical, for example, collecting genomic data for medical trials in the pharmaceutical industry. So tremendous amount of data can be collected off of machine-generated systems. And of course, specifically in genomic data, the processing that's required to analyze drug and drug interactions against genetic combinations can result in massive amounts of trial data that can come out of this analysis and out of those computations. The good news is that Hadoop significantly reduces the cost of running those calculations. It enables organizations to run a much broader set of calculations and computations at a much lower cost, as well as keep those results around for a longer period of time. So there's a significant financial and technological advantage to applying it to things like genomic testing. And monitoring patient vitals. So there are sensors and wireless sensors that are connected to almost every device and that patients can wear both while getting treatment in the hospital but as well at home. And of course, the kind of explosion in those self-monitoring devices is creating a tremendous amount of data because there's an increase in the frequency. For example, instead of collecting data when somebody visits or at some less frequent rate, once or twice a day, now you can take sensors and readings every minute or every 5 minutes or whatever the case may be, depending on the patient, depending on the situation. So that's going to create a tremendous amount of data, and what you can do is you can monitor and capture that data with Hadoop, keep it around and analyze it, and then also look across that data because you can keep it around to look for long-term trends within that data and be more predictive and proactive, right? So you can understand what are the indicators in data that might indicate that a patient health might be deteriorating, something that's a very early warning sign, and that's because you can keep that data around longer. Storing medical research data, so keeping data online in a way that makes it accessible and queryable by different systems, by researchers, by people who are trying to understand what's in the research data and be able to share it. Hadoop really provides a platform, an optimal platform for storing that data because it is built to run on low-cost commodity hardware, and it's meant to be scale out, meaning it'll store a large amount of data at a low cost, and that means it's available for future research projects. And it also speeds that sharing of that data with other researchers. So instead of having to pull data off of tape or go find it, now it's online in an online archive that is accessible and queryable, meaning that it's a lot easier for researchers to share it. Of course, that just improves the efficiency of the research process overall. And then finally, tracking equipment and medicines with RFID data. There are RFID tags on equipment, on sensors, on patients, and using that data and capturing that data can provide additional insight into usage. It allows organizations to find and track and understand where medicines are being used. It allows them to find medicines and direct them to places where they might most be better used, right? Places where there might be drugs sitting on a shelf that can be better used somewhere else before they expire. So it improves the efficiency of the overall drug usage, and also can do the same with equipment, right? Where is the vital equipment that I need? How much is it getting used? I can track its location. So all of this analysis of all that RFID data can be hugely valuable for hospitals and for organizations that are trying to utilize and take advantage of that data. So a couple of more generic use cases that we've seen specifically within our customer base. Now, drilling down one more level, we had a couple of great webinars last week. And if you didn't listen in, then I highly recommend you go and listen to the recordings. The first one we did was with a presenter from UC Irvine Health. Now, UC Irvine is a Southern California public university teaching hospital. They do about 17,000 patient admissions a year. They have about 400 physicians, and they do about 12,000 surgeries. So very active hospital. And the issue that they had was they were not able to store enough of the data that they wanted to have online and available so they could go and do analysis of their patients. They had 22 years of data for more than 1 million patients, resulting in about 9 million patient records. So a significant amount of data that they had, but the legacy system that they had that stored in, an old relational system, did not allow them to search or retrieve that data. So it gave them a substantial issue around trying to be able to access the data and use it for the physicians and the clinicians to have a decision support system. So they didn't really have access to the data they were capturing, even though they had this tremendous resource at their hands. They really weren't able to take full advantage of it. So what they did was they unified all of that data in a Hadoop-based platform and an application built on top of Hadoop. So firstly, there was a significant cost reduction just in moving the data to Hadoop. So they were able to save operational costs right away of about $500K. And then all of that data became searchable and retrievable. So they built the system on top of the Hadoop platform that enabled the clinicians to go in and search and access the data that they had in there, and they were able to add in additional information. They were able to add in social data, sensor data from patients. They began to put RFID tags on patients. They had begun to put RFID tags on patients and collect additional data so they could monitor more closely the activity of the patients. They also began to record vital signs for every minute of the patient's time that they spent inside of the hospital. So all of this was generating, of course, a huge amount of data, but they're now able to capture that, monitor that data, and notify clinicians if there was a crossing of risk thresholds in the data as it was monitored. So pretty substantial benefits that they saw in that system applied directly to the healthcare, and it's really the overall goal for UC Irvine was to provide better patient care through better use of the data that they had. It was a great talk, and again, I recommend you go and listen to that webinar if you have a chance. The other webinar we had last week, and again, much more detail here, specifically in the pharmaceutical area, was from Merck, and that was on last Thursday. So if you want to go and listen to that recording, highly recommend it as well. This was Merck, if you don't know, is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, more than 75,000 employees, headquartered in New Jersey. So the specific issue there for Merck was really trying to improve and optimize the production of vaccines. Right? They have these complex production systems. There are sensor data across the production system, and they really wanted to optimize, figure out where they could optimize, monitor the system at the highest level of detail, and be able to figure out where they could optimize the overall production, improving performance, even small improvements in performance of either the drug quality or just in the utilization that they get out of it, have a substantial positive result for Merck. So the existing system they had, and this may be the case that some of you are in, was really time-consuming. It was spreadsheet-based, very manual process. And once they collected the data from a run, it wasn't very accessible system. Right? It just stored in a bunch of spreadsheets. So it was very difficult to bring data together across the different systems. Not all of the data from the production system was collected into a single common repository, making it very difficult to bring that data together. So overall, just the storage of the data, the integration of disparate data types, the long-term collection and the accessibility of the data really was creating a problem for Merck. So they turned to a Hadoop-based platform, again, building an application, and you can think of this in terms of moving towards a data lake, but they had a data science platform, and it allowed them to bring together all of that vaccine manufacturing data. They could bring all that data together in one location at 1.5 terabytes of manufacturing data that they could collect, and then all of the different data sources, in this case 16 different data sources, could be stored in a single location and processed and analyzed, and it was much more time-consuming and much less time-consuming, and more effective and scalable platform. So they're able to really go in and analyze all that data, generate and understand the areas for improving their overall production system, and they're able to reduce their computation time for analyzing a run down to 1 day, even though they were processing over 1 billion records. So substantial improvements available for Merck in the pharmaceutical area, substantial benefits for UC Irvine in the healthcare area, coming from using a Hadoop-based platform to unify data in both cases. So those are a couple of great examples. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to John to take you through some additional details. John?
All right, thank you, John. So what I'd like to do is explore a number of different ways in which you can leverage big data in Hadoop to improve the drug development life cycle. And that's what you see here. Different companies will represent it in slightly different ways, but essentially this is what it looks like. You have preclinical, clinical, development and manufacturing, and then sales and marketing and reimbursement. And to help you achieve some of the same goals that John Kreise outlined with UC Irvine and Merck, it's important to start with the business goals. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a couple of examples related to sales and marketing and brand management use cases. And it really begins with prioritizing your business goals. So taking an assessment of your business goals, looking at the situation, what's the expected value that you could achieve by leveraging this process and platform that I'm about to describe. What are the KPIs you're going to do to measure your success? What information is required to understand those KPIs? And then map that to the data. So essentially the exercise we're going to walk through is taking these business goals for a couple of different use cases and mapping them back to the data. And then that data can go into your data lake, and you can leverage Hortonworks and Informatica to really process that data and deliver value. So let's get started. Let's first look at the kind of the situation. In the pharma and life sciences industry, in this new era, we're targeting specific populations to improve patient outcomes, and that's as a result of some of the recent regulations and so on. And this is really critical to reaching more customers and rapidly developing new markets so that pharmaceuticals and life science companies can really grow rapidly. And so customers are therefore really rethinking how to reach patients, payers, providers, government agencies at the right speed with the right information. And with some of the recent regulations, there's been a bit of a declining access to both prescribers and providers and so on because of limitations like in the Sunshine Act, where it kind of limits how much you can spend on these types of in-person activities. Do the formularies that the payers are restricting in terms of the types of drugs that can be prescribed. So all this is having an impact. So that's part of the situation we're dealing with here. So you have to kind of ask the question, well, first of all, who are my customers and how can I best reach them? Who are my key opinion leaders? That's what KOL stands for, in case you don't know. Key opinion leaders can be everything from doctors, payers, prescribers, even certain patient advocate groups. And so who are these key opinion leaders? How can I engage with them? what's the optimal mix of sales channels and marketing campaigns? That is, which physicians are likely to utilize a specific therapy, and what are the drugs and products that I can use to kind of target those segments? What's the optimal resource utilization of my field reps? Because they're expensive, and so how can I gauge the success of each of these sales visits so I can really optimize my sales and marketing dollars? So these are some goals for the sales and marketing use case. Now, let's further look at the situation. If we kind of go look at the past, traditionally, the way you would reach key opinion leaders was somewhat of a one-way communication, right? You'd go to conferences and seminars and do doctor's visits, and this is being, limited now with, like I said, regulations like the Sunshine Act, and also a lot of it was done word of mouth. And over the last few years, it's still kind of, a bit of one-to-one relationships. There are some compliance barriers that I mentioned that kind of limit the amount of activity you can do with your key opinion leaders. Once again, doctors and providers and prescribers and so on. And so, it's a little bit ad hoc. It's somewhat unstructured. It's pretty departmentalized in terms of the approach companies are taking. And there's an influence. The influence is shifting from the prescribers to the payers because they have more and more influence in terms of what can appear on the formularies and what they're going to pay in terms of performance or cost performance. Now, what's possible is you can with leveraging a more data-driven, data-centric approach is you can start to create a more collaborative, sustainable relationships with particular accounts. And you can start to influence, all the stakeholders, from prescribers to payers to providers to patient groups and so on. And you want to, really collaborate with, especially the payers, I would say, earlier in the launch, so that you can ensure success. And there's things like e-sampling and e-detailing. Just think of these as electronic means to really increase efficiency, but at the same time, because it's electronic, because it's digital, there's more information, more data that you can gather and determine the ultimate success of these programs and campaigns. So those are a few things that are happening and what's possible. And also, it's worth noting that one study showed that 66% of U.S. adults go online to do their research for their conditions. They look at blogs and online forums and things like that. So patients are starting to take a more active role. And the other thing that I'll mention is this pay for performance, right? This is another trend that you need to embrace. And what does that mean? It's basically, take the patient, if you want to think of this in terms of a formula, patient plus prescription plus outcome basically equals your payment-based performance. So that's important to think about that. Okay, with all that in mind now, let's get back to the value that we're trying to achieve. And I like to work backwards, from the value back to the data. So what we're trying to do in this use case is build sustainable, profitable relationships. We want to increase our marketing ROI and our return on sales. We want more drugs placed on the formularies of the payers and prescribers and providers. And so that's kind of the goal in this case. All right, so if that's the goal, what type of information do I need? Well, I need to be able to measure the optimal marketing mix. So I need to look at, historical data. I need to be a bit more predictive in terms of, what is that best marketing mix, do some what-if type analysis. What are some of the optimal contract rebates programs that, take a look at some of that data and that information. What is the optimal key opinion leader and marketing activities that are influencing the most? What are competitors spending on key opinion leaders? Because of the transparency with the Sunshine Act, you can actually see what your competitors are providing. So if that's the information you need, then what data is available to you today to help get better at measuring and gathering insights from this information and ultimately using that to your advantage? Well, of course, there's Salesforce automation, there's ERP. These are, this is data that's been available to you in the past. But you can also start looking at call center unstructured text. You can look at weblogs and click streams from patient forums in your websites and discussion groups. You can look at prescription data, anonymized data, patient anonymized data, social media data from Twitter and Facebook. You'd be surprised, a lot of patients and their families tweet about conditions that they're having. I mentioned e-detailing, so this is the ability for the pharmaceuticals to reach their key opinion leaders through online presentations, YouTube, and other types of blogs and things like that, patient forums. All this information is available to you. Now, as John was describing earlier, in the past it may have been not feasible to store or even access that data and process it at scale. And as we saw in the case of Merck and UC Irvine, now this is possible. So if this is now possible, imagine what you can do. You can really understand the sentiment of patients and their conditions through social data. You can understand, what therapies are having the best outcome in particular patient segment groups. And you can use this to your advantage. The second use case, once again related to sales and marketing, is more around brand management. And as we all know, most pharmaceuticals are facing very stiff competition from the generics. And it's interesting, another study was showing that branded medications can retain significant market share and in fact generate 25% or more of a brand's total lifetime revenue after the patent expires. So brand management is really important. And what are some things you should be thinking about? Well, this is kind of related to the last use case too, but what are patients, physicians, payers thinking about my brand? And you can measure that through a variety of different channels, social media, web-based things, and surveys. How can I associate our brand to a more positive outcome in lifestyle? How can I use social and mobile to promote my brand through these new digital channels and content marketing? How can I differentiate my brand from the competition? These are some things to be thinking about. And the situation is something like this. In the past, it was somewhat ad hoc. You would rely on doctors' recommendations. It was still kind of one-to-one. And even recently, even today, there's a lot of brand advertising related to specific diseases and therapies. There's very limited use of social media today. Certainly that could be used at a much greater scale. And the other thing that's starting to take hold is patients, as I mentioned, are taking a much more active role in their outcomes and their therapies and understanding their diseases, especially in dealing with chronic diseases. And so what's really possible now is, once again, through a combination of technologies and regulations and so on, and just greater collaboration within the healthcare industry, is to increase the market share with a very strong brand that appeals to patients' needs and their outcomes and optimizes this cost performance for the payers. And this is, one of the things that's possible. This is one of the key goals that you can address. So let's go back to our method here, where we start with the value and the metrics we're going to use to measure the impact of that value, and then map it back to the data with respect to brand management. So the goal here, in a measurable sense, is to increase the market share with strong brand power, to speed the adoption of brand to peak sales, to increase the lift, your marketing lift by associating with healthy lifestyles, whether it's related to nutrition and exercise and compliance with therapies, increasing customer loyalty, increasing the brand recognition, and having a greater engagement with the patients and the customers that are using your brand to show that you're really interested in their outcome and helping them achieve the best outcome, because now this is what payers and providers are looking at. This is how even pharmaceuticals and life science companies are starting to get reimbursed and put on formularies. So that's important. The information you're going to need to be successful then is to be able to manage the brand cost performance across a variety of patient populations. And the more segmented and focused you get, you can start to see which patient populations have the highest efficacy and really go after those and double down in those areas, or which ones are underserved and could potentially benefit from particular drugs. This could open up new markets for growth. What communities and topics are generating a positive brand perception out there in online and digital communities? What's the brand influence on customer loyalty? What's the brand performance compared to competitors? Once again, due to transparency from regulations, you can actually look at this. And so now, given that we've removed a lot of the barriers, the technological barriers in terms of storing and processing data at scale, you can look at the weblogs from these lifestyle campaigns, from these websites and patient forums and blogs. You can look at all that information and see what's working, what isn't, what are people thinking, patients thinking. You can leverage, as we saw at UC Irvine, mobile health sensor monitoring data to determine, what's being most effective and what isn't. You can leverage third-party depersonalized or anonymized data based on brand use and effectiveness through prescriptions and EMR data. Salesforce automation data, of course, you can access that. So this is how you get started, right? And if you don't start here, then it's unclear as to what you can achieve. Starting with the business value, mapping it to the information and the KPIs, and back to the data. And this becomes an iterative process, right? It's not you just do it once, but you form an analytics team, and that gets to my next segue into what's the architecture and the process used to really leverage, turn that raw material of big data into the value that we just talked about. I think of it as a big data supply chain. So you have a data science or analytics team or organization consisting of course, a data scientist, data engineers, business subject matter experts, analysts, and a variety of other people. They collaborate, they prioritize the goals as I suggested, they generate insights, they validate their hypothesis, their models, their algorithms. They turn that into something that's operational, that is delivering the information directly to the key stakeholders, maybe directly even to the patients themselves and the providers themselves through these mechanisms which I mentioned earlier, so that they can take immediate action and be very proactive, very engaged with their patient populations. And underlying this process and methodology is turning the data through this supply chain, being able to access and acquire and store all the types of data that I mentioned earlier, weblogs, SFA, ERP data, sensor device data, all the other data sets that John had mentioned in his slides, storing it at scale in let's say, a data lake, refining and enriching it, being able to explore and profile and visualize the data and really start to curate it over time so that the data team can start to merge and mash up data sets and discover interesting patterns and trends and use that to reach and achieve some of the goals I had mentioned earlier. That's the process. The architecture that we've put together with Hortonworks looks something like this. So you have all these different data types off to the left, in the form of databases and files that could even be on mainframe systems. You have social data, sensor device data, a variety of different data types and data formats and structures. We have the ability to load the data into Hortonworks Apache Hadoop using a variety of different ways. It can be batch loaded. You could replicate an entire schema or a subset of a schema. You can stream tens of millions of records per second from sensor devices or machine logs or web logs into HDFS. You can even archive data and compress it at a highly compressed rate within the Hadoop cluster. And then natively, we can execute native MapReduce on Hadoop by profiling, parsing the multi-structured data, extracting information, doing ETL, right, data integration, data quality, cleansing the data as appropriate, as needed, so it's fit for use, doing data matching. All these things are really 80% of the work in a data analytics project, right? Once you do all this data preparation work, then the analysis in some cases becomes quite easy. But we have pre-built parsers, pre-built ETL transforms and data quality rules that don't require you to have to program in Java, MapReduce, or Pig or anything like that. You can just use a visual development environment that's metadata driven. You can run that natively on Hadoop, and then you can deliver it to your other enterprise systems if required, back into the data warehouse or to enrich the master data using a variety of different batch and real-time mechanisms. So that's the reference architecture, and we have more information available to you if you're interested. And now let's look at how you would actually use that reference architecture in the context of what John had mentioned earlier, the data lake, because this is a very common design pattern. Sorry for all the little boxes here. I'll try and walk you through this somewhat step by step. But the first step would be to leverage that reference architecture that I described on the previous slide to load the data into Hadoop a variety of different ways. As I mentioned, you can batch load it, replicate it, stream it. That's steps 1, 2, and 3. Because you're dealing with sometimes sensitive data, patient PII information, you may want to mask the sensitive data on Hadoop. We can do that. The next step would be to access the patient master or the prescriber master or the provider or payer master, whatever is needed from the MDM system. We have a multi-domain MDM product that you can leverage, and that you can stream that master data into Hadoop. And think of why that's necessary. Well, if you want to find some interesting patterns, whether it's specific to a particular provider or payer patient, or maybe it's a particular demographic because you're not allowed to know which patient this is, then that's extremely important. Or the relationships between these entities, that can all be leveraged and come from your MDM system into Hadoop to join and filter and aggregate information in a very interesting way. And so that's part of the refining and curating of these data sets within the data lake. And then you want to make that available. You want to use that to enrich the information that's in your other enterprise systems, whether it's in the enterprise data warehouse or whether it's in the master data management system. That's step 7. And then 8, then there comes the point where, hey, okay, now that I've done this work and we can automate this, you can start to explore and validate and visualize and do some of the rich and advanced analytics. You want to continue to govern the data through data quality and metadata management, who's using what, how's it being used, where is it being used, what's the lineage or the provenance of these data sets, where's it coming from, and so on. That's step 9. And then if you want to start to be more proactive in a real-time sense, you can leverage event-based processing platforms like complex event processing engines to take a real-time feed directly into that, correlate it with some of the patterns and trends that you're seeing in your data lake, and react in real time. Send an alert to an emergency room provider, or send an alert to a patient's tablet or doctor's tablet. A number of different things that can be done there. Or if you're a payer, maybe it's related to fraud detection. And then finally, you can do a more intelligent way of delivering this information through a pub-sub type model, subscribing to particular data sets or topics of interest and publish them to the right constituencies. So all this is available. It's that reference architecture which we described earlier supports this process so that you can turn that raw data into value. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Now I'd like to turn it back to John.
Thanks, John. That was very informative in terms of how data can be used and how it's actually being leveraged in a couple of particular flows. So appreciate that. I want to remind everybody that you can ask questions via the chat or the Q&A panel for myself or for John. And what I want to do whilst we're giving you a few moments to think about your questions and ask them is I want to talk to you about a little bit about next steps. So you can certainly learn a lot more about the partnership that we have, a good, strong, and deep partnership with Informatica on our website or as well on the Informatica website. A great place to get started learning Hadoop is with the Hortonworks sandbox. So you can download and play with Hadoop and learn it through pre-built tutorials. And as well, if you're looking to learn a lot more, and again, many of you are at the beginning of your journey, then I'd also suggest you consider the Hadoop Summit, which is June 3rd through 5th in San Jose, California. There are a tremendous amount of content that's going to be presented there, more than 120 sessions, everything from deep technical presentations from the actual committers of the open source code through to enterprises who are using Hadoop to solve a wide range of business and technical issues. So a lot of great sessions. Of course, we'll also have educational keynote sessions, and there's a lot of other kind of, I'll call it conference jewelry, other kind of meetups and activities that are happening around the event. So if you're just learning and you're looking to deepen that knowledge, a great way to do it is at Hadoop Summit. It's the oldest and largest Hadoop community event that happens worldwide. So now what I'll do is I'll turn it back over to Kim and let Kim just take us through a couple of questions that have come in. Kim?
All right, thanks, John. Good details and great questions, you guys. So 2 questions came in. What kind of tools are available right now for people that want to get started with big data? And how does one get started? I think, John K., why don't you talk?
Yeah, I'll start, and then maybe, John, you can fill in. So I touched on it a little bit, but the Hortonworks Sandbox is a great place to start if you're just wanting to learn the technology. It's a single node VM of the Hortonworks data platform with built-in tutorials. I think there's more than 24 tutorials for learning all the aspects of the platform. There are also partner-submitted tutorials and ecosystem-submitted tutorials. So I think in total, maybe closing in on 50-ish tutorials available for that run on and off of this platform that'll help you learn how to interact with various pieces of the ecosystem and the platform itself. More generally speaking, if you want to get going on a bigger real cluster, certainly suggest starting small in scope and small in scale. So thinking in terms of what kind of data type that you have that you want to capture and exploit, and using some of the ways that John talked about in terms of capturing the data and loading that into Hadoop, and then building an application. What business problem do you want to start? But I would start relatively simple in terms of 1, maybe 2 different data types, as well as a kind of a specific business problem. Start there. That's your best chance for success. John, I don't know if you want to add in on that.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would agree. Start simple. Start with a couple of different data sets. We have a tool called the Informatica Power Center Big Data Edition, which makes it real easy for you to get started. It runs on Hortonworks HTTP platform, Apache Hadoop, and so you can use that to quickly get started and access pretty much any type of data, ingest that into Hadoop, use a visual development environment to do what I had described as that 80% of the work problem, which is basically accessing, integrating, normalizing, standardizing the data, do that in a very easy fashion. Start with, some of the types of data you might be more familiar with, but even if you want to bring in, some of the more, complex data formats like weblogs and things like that, we have parsing technology available in the Big Data Edition to make that really easy and simple. But otherwise, I would agree, start small with a clear business goal in mind.
Thanks, John. Kim, is there more?
Yeah, a couple more questions. This is for John Cresta. Is Hadoop able to collect data from different sources?
Okay, good question. So for those who are just getting going, yeah, absolutely. The base storage component of Hadoop is something called the Hadoop Distributed File System, and it is just like a file system that is on your PC or desktop that you have sitting in front of you likely, and meaning that it can store any kind of file in its native format, just like you can store MP3s, Word docs, and anything, and videos and whatever else on your file system. Hadoop is the same. It can store any data, whether it's highly structured data that's been taken out of a relational database or something that is completely unstructured text file or audio file or something else. So there's definitely the ability to store multiple data sources in a single file system. That is really one of the general flexibilities and benefits of Hadoop. It's schema on read, meaning you do not have to apply structure before you write that data. It's stored in its native format. That's a big advantage to the system, and one that really unlocks a lot of the value in the data types that you can now capture. So absolutely.
Great, thanks, John. For the both of you, what skills and technologies recommended for big data?
John, you want to start?
Sure. It turns out that's kind of one of the biggest issues in getting started with a big data project is sometimes the skills gap. And at Informatica, we've tried to make that easy for you. So if you are an Informatica customer and you use PowerCenter today, you have those skills. Every PowerCenter developer is now a Hadoop developer. They can leverage that tool I mentioned earlier, the PowerCenter Big Data Edition. You don't have to program in Java, MapReduce, or Pig or Hive. Just to gain product, we've seen productivity gains of about 5x. So that's one aspect. But the other types of skills you're going to want to need is certainly some good, analytics skills, ETL knowledge, data integration, data quality, analytics. And you may have those skills in-house today. That's great. If not, you can train people. There's a number of different, Hortonworks provides a lot of training. Informatica provides training. There's more and more universities rolling out programs related to data science and things like that. So a lot of opportunity to upgrade skills or to reach out to other avenues.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, John. I think depending on how you're coming at it, right, because there's different aspects of the loading and the understanding and the processing of data. There's often statistical background to be able to do some of the analysis of data. So some background in that. Development background, what we have typically seen for Hadoop early on was Java skills, right? Hadoop is natively a Java-based platform for development in MapReduce and even some of the higher level languages. And then if you want to use even some of the higher level ability to query against the data, SQL skills are quite relevant. There are in Hadoop SQL engines like Apache Hive, and there are integrated SQL engines like those coming from companies like Teradata and Microsoft. So there's definitely integrated SQL skills, there's Java development skills, there's of course always helps to have some statistical background. Rarely do all these skills come in one person, so you typically going to be talking about a small team of people who combine together their skills really to go and tackle this. Somebody who knows a little bit about the data, a little bit about the business problem, somebody has some development skills, and then somebody has the ability to bring that data together. You combine those together, and you're going to have a team that can be successful with a big data project.
Great, thanks, you guys. We have 3 minutes left. I want to go over kind of a few housekeeping closeout. Yeah, the webinar, well, we record the webinar and it will be available on our website at the end of this week. I will send you guys a personalized email from me, direct you to the link where you can download the recording and the slides so you can share it to your team afterwards. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to answer them for you at events@hortonworks.com. And with that, I would like to thank John Crayson and John Hadoop for their time and you guys for joining us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.